Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the John DeVito Show. I'm going to be doing a special topic today, and this is a hard one. This is another difficult show for me to do. And as you know, I've done a lot of shows about abuse at Christian boarding schools in the Midwest. I've done a lot of different shows where I've interviewed a lot of people who have been abused and have suffered through a lot of pain in their life. And most recently, I did a show on the abduction and murder of Holly Bish. Molly was a 16-year-old girl who was abducted, and her body was found 3 years later in the woods of central Massachusetts. And she was a beautiful young woman, taken from her parents, taken from her family, and murdered. And, for me, I just can't begin to even understand how a human being could do something like this, where he could come out and take a young woman or a young person or really anybody and end their life. And I think it's hard for any of us to really understand how someone could actually come out and do that. So as I was doing the Holly Bish case, it's made me start to think a little bit about another case that had happened also in Massachusetts. And this case happened about 20 minutes away from where Holly Bish lived. And it happened, I believe it was 7 years before Holly Bish was abducted and murdered. And the more I looked into these two cases, the Holly Bish case, which was in Warren, Massachusetts, and then another 10-year-old beautiful young girl by the name of Holly Piirainen. Her full name was Holly Kristen Piirainen. She was born January 19th, 1983, and she was abducted and murdered on August 5th, 1993. Now, Holly was a 10-year-old American murder victim who was originally from Grafton, Massachusetts. Now, Grafton, Massachusetts is southeast of Worcester in the state of Massachusetts. Now, Worcester is directly in the center of the state, and Grafton is a little bit southeast of Worcester. Now, she and her brother had been visiting their grandparents in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. Sturbridge is a beautiful little town, a lot of little antique shops. It's really a very, very nice place to grow up, a very nice place to live, and all in all, just a beautiful American town, a typical New England town. Unfortunately, when she and her brother had been visiting their grandparents in Sturbridge, Holly was abducted and murdered. Very, very sad story. And when you hear a little bit more about this story and you hear some of the parallels and some of the comparisons and some of the connections between these two cases, it makes me wonder if there was really a connection between the Holly Bish murder and the Holly Piirainen murder. And it's just, I'm sitting here right now, I'm looking at this young girl's picture. She was a beautiful young girl, 10 years old. And to have her life taken like this is just horrible. And I decided to do this show after doing the Holly Bish show because, Molly has gotten a lot of press over her abduction, as she should have. And there was a huge, search for her, where at the time it was the biggest search in Massachusetts history for a young person who disappeared, assumed being abducted. Now, Holly doesn't get as much press, I guess, as the other case. And it's probably because it happened, 7 years earlier. It happened before, all the different forms of media that came out. And the sad thing about the Holly Piirainen case is, again, she went missing in 1993. She would have been 37 years old right now. And they still haven't found the person that killed her. They have had some leads. They found some people that may have been maybe responsible for Holly's death, but they still have not closed this case. They have not found beautiful young Holly Piirainen's murderer. And for me, I was hoping that maybe by doing this podcast, it would shed a little bit more attention on the Holly Piirainen case, and just to make sure that she is not forgotten. Because I sit here and I look at this picture, it haunts me to see this beautiful young girl who was taken from her parents and basically taken from her grandparents because she was visiting them at the time in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So I'm going to read a little bit about Holly, read a little bit about the circumstances that surrounded, the Holly Piirainen case. And quite frankly, there isn't as much written about her on the internet as there are some other cases. So there's not a lot for me to pull from, but I'm just going to, go through what happened, talk about Holly a little bit, talk about, her family's efforts in order to find out who the murderer was who stole their beautiful daughter and granddaughter, and see if we can maybe shed a little extra light onto Holly's case. And, I'm hoping that maybe at some point the family can get some closure so they can move forward and at least know that the person that did this has been brought to justice. So, all right, so Piirainen and her brother were visiting their grandparents in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And I can tell you, I've been to Sturbridge many, many times. It's as safe a town as you could possibly imagine being in. It's any town USA. It's a small little, middle class, upper middle class town. It's beautiful, scattered with antique shops, like I mentioned earlier. And it's located right in the heart of Massachusetts. It's a beautiful little town. So Holly and her brother, went to spend some time with their grandparents. And when they were there, they found out that one of the neighbors had new puppies. So the grandparents let her go down to the neighbor's house with her brother to see the new puppies. And again, who wouldn't do that? I mean, anybody would do that. And I imagine that probably over the years, the grandparents have felt guilt over this. And I hope that maybe you hear this, because this is not your fault. You did not do this. This was not your error. You did what anybody would do, and you would allow your grandchildren to go see these puppies. And in the world I would like to live in, that should be okay every day of the week. It should never be the wrong decision. So for Holly's grandparents, I'm very, very sorry that this happened. But after visiting the puppies, her brother, who was younger, returned back to the cottage where the grandparents lived, but Holly Piirainen did not. And then they found one of Holly Piirainen's shoes by the side of the road. Now, something I had read earlier today about finding that shoe. Apparently, Holly was a member of the 4-H club. And when she was, I guess, in one of the classes they had at 4-H, they had talked about, if anything ever happens to you where you feel like you're in danger, where you feel like you might get abducted, make sure you always try to leave a piece of clothing, jewelry, or anything behind so people will know that something happened to you. So really, to consider that they found her shoe by the side of the road, to me, obviously shows that someone took her against her will. Someone abducted her, someone took her against her will, and someone did the absolute unthinkable to this beautiful young woman and ended her life. And I'm sorry if you hear the rising in my voice, but this gets me angry. It upsets me. And it bothers me that this poor young woman was taken from her loved ones and her life was taken from her. And I can't imagine the pain that the grandparents and the parents and her siblings must have felt on losing her, very similar to the family of Molly Bish. So, searching, they started, they reported Holly missing. The searching of Holly Piirainen took 2 months. On October 23rd, 1993, Holly Piirainen's remains were found by hunters in the woods in Brimfield, Massachusetts. Now, Brimfield is not too far away from Sturbridge. It's also very close to Warren, Massachusetts, the town that Molly Bish was taken from. Now, when you look at these two towns, again, and you look at the two cases, I mean, the thing that really gets me is you've got this young Holly Piirainen. She was taken against her will. No one saw it. No one witnessed it. No one had any idea what happened to her. And then a period of time after her abduction and obvious murder, hunters found her remains in the woods, just like hunters found the remains of Molly Bish in the woods. So when you look at the parallels of location, when you look at the parallels of the manner in which these two young women were found, both murdered, I mean, it's so creepy and so scary, the parallels and the similarities between these two cases, where these two young women were abducted from the same general area. They were found in the same general manner. And unfortunately, the killer hasn't been found in either case. So, excuse me, looking ahead. Now, I'm reading some articles here, so bear with me as I read some of these to you as I try to educate you on what happened. Now, even this article that I'm reading now makes some comparisons between Molly and Holly. So, and this is a really, really creepy part. So I want you to all hear this and kind of take this in. And I did mention this on the podcast I did about Molly Bish. And to me, I believe in coincidences in life, but sometimes coincidences are so over the top. It makes me really doubt that it could really be a coincidence. Okay. So, fellow resident Molly Bish, as we talked about on the other podcast, disappeared on June 27th, 2000, while working at a lifeguard on Commons Pond in Warren, Massachusetts. Her body was also found in a wooded area in Hampden County on June 9th, 2003, and she was only found 5 miles from her family's home. Breaks my heart to even think of that. I mean, I literally have tears welling up in my eyes right now thinking about this. Police consider the possibility that the two cases could be related. A former Springfield resident, David Pouliot, is considered a person of interest in both cases. It was discovered, and this is the really creepy, amazing, in some ways a beautiful part, where one girl reached out to the other girl's family, but it was discovered that Molly Bish had written a letter to Holly Piirainen's family following Holly's disappearance. This is a small excerpt from the letter that Molly Bish wrote when she was only 10 years old. "I am very sorry," she said. "I wish I could make it up to you. Holly is a very pretty girl. She is almost as tall as me. I wish I knew Holly. I hope they found her." That was Molly Bish, an excerpt of the letter she wrote at the age of 10 to the parents of Holly Piirainen. So these two girls lived literally 20 minutes apart. 20 minutes. It's a short drive. They were both found in the woods, murdered after being abducted by hunters. And there was a connection where young Molly, at the age of 10, wrote a letter to the parents of Holly Piirainen, wishing them the best and hoping that they find their daughter. 6 years later, Molly Bish herself would be abducted and murdered. Now, when you look at that, I mean, obviously there are parallels. Obviously there are similarities. I mean, these could be two separate cases by two separate sick individuals who murdered these beautiful young women. Or maybe there's a similarity. Maybe there's a connection in this case. Now, for me, when you look at, the situation of Molly sending that letter to Holly, I'm sure the police have investigated this and done all the things they need to do to look at any potential connections between people that might know both of the families, someone that might be close to one family. I mean, to think that this young girl sent a letter to this girl's family and then that young girl got abducted herself, that is just absolutely bone chilling down to the core for me. And it's sad. So, all right, fast forwarding ahead. And this is, these shows, I don't enjoy doing these. But for me, if my voice will get out there and maybe help someone come forward, I do get a decent number of downloads to the show. So if somebody hears this and knows something about either the Molly Bish case or the Holly Piirainen case, please come forward. Please contact your local authorities. Please do something to help these families get some peace of mind after all these years of being left not knowing what happened to the beautiful daughters. So there have been some updates over the years. On January 3rd, 2012, Hampden County Attorney Mark Mastriani announced that forensic evidence found near Piirainen's body had been linked to that David Pouliot. David Pouliot is a gentleman, again, that they felt could be a connection between Molly and Holly. So they did name him as a person of interest in the crime. As of January 2012, he has not yet formally been named a suspect. Pouliot frequently hunted and fished around the area where Piirainen's body was found. But again, that happened back in 2012. Here we are in 2021. So it must have been either this David Pouliot was not the right person. Maybe they didn't have evidence that this was the right person. But for whatever reason, there has never been an arrest of David Pouliot in either of the two murders. So who knows what developments have happened over the years, but it seems that for whatever reason, either David Pouliot was not the guilty party or they did not have enough evidence to pursue him in either of the crimes. So fast forwarding ahead now to October 2020, Boston news station WCVB TV reported that according to sources, the body of a 22-year-old man was exhumed at a cemetery in Hampden County in Massachusetts. which might be connected to the investigation into the disappearance and murder of Holly Piirainen. Sources told the news station that the man exhumed was not Pouliot. So it sounds like maybe, the police looked at Pouliot, realized either A, they didn't have the evidence, or B, he was not the actual person. And if he was not the actual person, you have to feel bad for the attention that he got, being someone that was blamed for such a heinous crime, over the years. Now, according to a Springfield, Massachusetts-based television station, the Western Mass News, Holly's cousin, Leah Jolin, said investigators were searching for a letter placed in the subject's coffin that could advance the case. But Jolin said that the retrieved item had suffered a lot of water damage and over the last two decades in the ground. So basically, what we've been told, they're not really sure that they're going to find anything useful. So, and as I said, there's a few different articles here. I'm going to look at another one right now about Holly to see if I can get any other information, and I may actually kind of read through this information about her as well. But unfortunately, because Holly had been abducted so long ago, it seems like that this has kind of faded into the background. It's kind of faded away from the forefront of people thinking about her case. I mean, we do hear about Molly Bish, but even Molly was 20 years ago now. So these things, after they're not solved for a period of time, people start to forget about them, and people start to not look for the killers any longer. I mean, some of the killers may have passed. Who knows? But you would hope that with today's DNA evidence, maybe somehow, even if a murderer has passed, that someone could find the murderer of these two young women, whether they're the same person, whether they're different people, whoever they may be, and find who actually took their lives. Now, I'm going to read this. Here's another thing here about Holly. And this comes from a website called True Crime Stories. And, I don't look at what I'm doing as like a true crime story. I know that some people might look at it that way. I'm looking to make a difference. I'm looking to help if I can by sharing this information. But I'm going to read this to you so all of you get a little bit better understanding as to what happened in the Holly Piirainen case. So bear with me as I read through this, and we'll see if we can maybe shed a little bit more light on what happened to her. Okay. So it was the 5th of August in 1993. It was Thursday. 10-year-old Holly Piirainen was visiting her grandmother at her grandmother's cottage in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, with her brothers and father Richard. They were from Grafton, Massachusetts, which is probably about 30 minutes from Sturbridge. It's not far away. And they visited Sturbridge apparently very often. As Holly's grandmother, Maureen Lemieux, lived there, they often went there for a vacation. And that month, August in 1993, they planned a week-long vacation. They had just arrived the day before. The cottage was a beautiful lakefront cottage in a quiet area. Holly absolutely loved it there. She wanted to one day be a marine biologist, and she loved being close to the water in Sturbridge. I mean, that seems like a dream come true. You're a young kid. You're going to your cottage with your grandmother. You're going to be on the water, spending time with your family. I mean, just a dream come true that unfortunately quickly turned into a lifelong nightmare for her family. So Holly heard that one of her grandmother's neighbors had a dog who had just given birth to some puppies. There were little collie puppies, and they were in a farmhouse at the corner of the street. Holly adored dogs and couldn't wait to go see them. Now, you remember she was a member of the 4-H, so she obviously loved animals and pets and things like that. So Holly left her grandmother's house and walked down the street at 11:45 a.m. She went there with her 5-year-old brother, Zachary. Richard, the father, saw them walking down the street. And in between that paragraph, there's a beautiful picture of young Holly. And if you get a chance, Google the pictures of Holly Piirainen and just take a look at how cute she was. The name, if you want to look at it, via Google, her first name is Holly, Holly. The last name is Piirainen, and it's spelled Piirainen. So that's Holly Piirainen. So Holly and Zachary, her little brother, arrived at the residence in the area of Allen and South Shore Roads in Sturbridge to play with the puppies. But just a short while later, Zachary returned to his grandmother's cottage. He was alone. Zachary told his father that Holly had told him to go home without her. And they show a picture of the dad. Richard sent Holly's two older brothers, Andrew, down the street to tell her to come home. He did as he was told, but returned a few minutes later without Holly. There was no sign of Holly on that street, but he did find one of her shoes. Holly put the two boys into the Jeep, or actually Richard put the two boys into the Jeep and went out to try to find Holly. He drove up and down the street, but there were no signs of her anywhere. Nobody saw anything and nobody heard anything. Richard reported Holly missing to the police. A huge search began. A ground search was carried out along with a search by air, and the lake was searched. Dogs and search teams searched the woods, but nothing was found. They believe Holly disappeared around 12:50 p.m. They believe she was abducted, but thought it may have been an opportunistic attack, as Holly had just arrived the day before, and very few people knew she was in the area. Just 1 week before Holly went missing, Holly had attended a 4-H camp, and one of the counselors told the children to leave something behind if they were ever taken. Holly's grandmother believes that Holly left behind her shoe on purpose. I mean, can you imagine that? That had just happened the week before she had gone. A 4-H camp counselor told her if something was happening and someone tried to take her, leave something behind. And that's exactly what young Holly did. Oh, it's just so sad to think about this. You know, she was a beautiful young girl. Molly was a beautiful young girl. These things happen far too often in this country. And I wish there was something we could do to stop this and prevent it from happening. It's just heartbreaking to see. So further telling the story, the family was suspicious of everyone, as they should have been. Maureen asked to search neighbors' houses and their cars. If they refused, they gave their names to the police. Despite the huge search, there were no solid leads in the case, and it would be a further 72 days before the family received some news. On the 23rd of October, 1993, a group of hunters made a harrowing discovery. They found Holly's remains in a wooded area off of 5 Bridge Road in Brimfield, Massachusetts. Brimfield is a few miles from where Holly was last seen. Her cause of death, again, could not be determined. But again, you think of the similarities between Holly Piirainen and Molly Bish. They were both abducted in plain daylight. They were found a long period of time after they were abducted in an area that was frequented by hunters. A lot of similarities. And then you put together that note that Molly Bish had sent Holly Piirainen when Molly was only 16 years old. And to me, it just seems like there are too many coincidences to look in a different direction. But again, you know, I'm not a police officer. I'm a podcaster. But when I read it, I'm sure like anybody can basically deduce that there had to be some type of connection between the two. So, all right, when they found Holly, police found items of interest in the area where Holly's remains were found, but it wasn't until years later that they could test them to any degree of accuracy. Remember, this happened in 1993, and a lot of the technologies that we have now were not available back then. So investigators named David Pouliot, a Vietnam veteran who worked for a juvenile detention center, as a person of interest. Mark Mastriani, who again at the time was the district attorney, said that David was linked to the evidence found near Holly's body. And this is actually a direct quote from the district attorney. The nature and character of the item tested, as well as the condition and location upon discovery, suggests Mr. Pouliot and or persons associated with him were in the immediate crime scene area at a time relevant to Holly's disappearance and the location of her remains. I mean, if you think about that, that's a pretty strong statement. I mean, they're saying that the evidence that they had showed that he had to be in the area of the abduction and in the area in which the remains were discovered. So you could see why they named him as a pretty serious, person of interest. But unfortunately, again, as of 2012, as of 1993, this gentleman has never been arrested. So I'm not sure if he's been exonerated or if he is still a person of interest. So Mastriani did not reveal what the item was. David was known to frequent Brimfield at that time to hunt and fish. David died, so he passed away before the evidence allegedly linked him to the crime. Holly's family did not know David and had not heard his name until the police had mentioned it. Okay, and again, this is another part of the story. We read this already once, but I'm going to read it again just because it's such an important thing to me. To further add to the mystery of this case, the young woman, Molly Bish, wrote to Holly's family when Holly went missing. Molly was 10 at the time, and the letter she wrote, again, as we mentioned earlier, I am very sorry. I wish I could make it up to you. Holly is a very pretty girl. She's almost as tall as me. I wish I knew Holly. I hope they found her. Just 7 years after Holly went missing, Molly's name also appeared in the news. Molly was kidnapped and murdered. Molly's remains were found in a wooded area in Worcester County. She was just 16 years old, and her parents and her siblings are still looking for her. As I mentioned in the recording that I did last week about the Molly Bish case, her sister, Heather Bish, made a comment that just haunts me when I think about it. You know, she's a teacher, and she was saying for the last 20 years, she's been a teacher who's been trying to solve the murder of her sister. She just wants to go back to being a teacher again. There were recent developments where the police had named another suspect in the Molly Bish case, but to this date, neither Holly or Molly have had their murders solved. And I mean, for them to be so close together and to have all the connections that they've had, to me, it is just sad. It's heartbreaking. It is, you know, painful. And I can't even imagine what this must feel like to the families. So I guess, my plea to all of you, for anybody that may listen to this podcast, if you live in Massachusetts, if you know of anything that happened during that time, if you maybe know of something that happened with Molly Bish, if you know of something that happened in the Sturbridge area with young Holly Piirainen, even if it seems small, even if it seems insignificant, contact your local authorities and see if you can help these families finally get some justice. Help them finally get some peace of mind. I mean, no parent should ever, ever, ever have to bury a child. And you've got two families that have, had to do this and then have had to sit back and wonder what happened to their babies, what happened to their beautiful daughters, what happened to these young women who were cut down in the early parts of their life. And you look at, Holly Piirainen wanted to be a marine biologist. I'm not sure exactly what Molly Bish wanted to do, but they were two young women that could have changed the world, and they were taken from their families and taken from everybody way too soon. So, I don't have a lot else I want to say about these cases. After doing the Molly Bish case show that I did last week, I've been thinking about Holly Piirainen quite a bit, and I decided to get on and do another podcast about her specifically. So Holly Piirainen, the Piirainen family, the Bish family, my prayers are with all of you, and I hope that God has you in his favor, and you at some point get peace of mind by finding out who took your daughters, and hopefully you can maybe move forward knowing that your daughters are hopefully in a better place, and you can have closure, for your families. And it's just such a very, very sad thing that these things happen. So I may do a few more of these shows. I'm going to continue to research maybe some of the other cases in the area. I think one that I may speak on also is the murder of Vanessa Marcotte. She's a young woman that was murdered in Princeton, Massachusetts, a few years back. And they believe that they do have the person that abducted and murdered her in our area, and he is coming up for trial soon. So they do have DNA evidence on him, and I may do a show about him and maybe some others. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me on Twitter. You can email me. Let me know if you have a case that maybe I should pursue, something I should look into, and something I should do a podcast on. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to end the podcast right now. And again, I just want to leave it by saying God bless Molly Bish, and God bless Holly Piirainen, and prayers to everyone who is associated with both of these young women. Hopefully at some point you will all be able to rest and know that the people that did this have been brought to justice. Okay, take care. Love everybody. Go out and do something nice for somebody else, and hold your young ones tight when you have a chance. Okay, love you all. Take care now.